and today we're going to be talking about Dedication and Leadership by Douglas Hyde. So the gist of this book is you have the author, Douglas Hyde, is talking about his personal experience as a communist. So he was a member of the Communist Party in Britain, and how his experience with that influenced his thinkings not on why communism is good or anything like that, but on how to start a mass movement that actually changes the world. And he then renounced his communist ways and became a devout Catholic. And he wrote this book to demonstrate how the communists are much better at living, professing, and expanding their beliefs than modern Christians, and specifically Catholics, are. And he goes through this compare and contrast between the communists and the Catholics as sort of a way to show Catholics how they can do a better job. And there's some really good stuff in here, and I think we can use this as a base to understand, how do we enact change in the world, and how do we create a mass movement. And I think many people are waiting for, whatever group or whatever party is going to do something. Well, I think if you were to follow what he does in this book, it's going to be whoever follows this method to relatively closely is going to be the movement that is going to succeed. So I have a few quotes in the beginning that really stuck out, and then I'm just going to give a minor summary of each chapter, because each chapter sort of had its own punch to it. So the first thing that was important, he says, the communist appeal to idealism is direct and audacious. They say that if you make mean little demands upon people, you will get a mean little response, which is all you deserve. But if you make big demands on them, you will get an heroic response. They prove in practice that this is so, over and over again. They work on the assumption that if you call for big sacrifices, people will respond to this, and moreover, the relatively smaller sacrifices will come quite naturally. And to start off with this is pretty powerful, because if you look at how little Christians are willing to do, so he talks about how the communists, they would ask them for something like 50% of your wages going to the party, and then you have to dedicate X hours of work on top of your actual job to party activities and all of these things. And this is right off the bat. As soon as you commit and say, hey, I want to join the Communist Party, they're immediately putting you to work. Now, Christians are the exact opposite. You can barely even get Christians to show up to church once a week. Sometimes they can be good at donating as far as money goes, but as far as donating time, it's totally non-existent. And even things like sacrifices in order to profess your faith, like I didn't even know until a few months ago that Catholics used to never eat meat on Fridays. And that's a small thing to ask. It might not be fully rational, but it's just a small sacrifice that sort of says I'm doing some sort of penance and some sort of presentation of my beliefs. It's a very small thing you can do that deepens your faith. And that was too much for people. So now they only don't eat meat on Fridays for 4 or 5 weeks out of the year during Lent. So that's another thing. The church does not ask anything of its people. And this is also why you see a watering down of the church as a whole. Now, the message itself is now, be nice to people. Wow, that's really, really groundbreaking stuff. And so as you ask less of people, it's also diluting your message. Whereas if you have, strong people who are doing actions and going out and doing things for the benefit of the community, and also to spread your faith through, even propaganda, you could call it, you're going to, if you don't have that, you're going to naturally only attract people who are lazy and don't want to fully participate in your religion. So this as a whole, I think, really gets to some of the core problems with Catholicism and Christianity as a whole, just not asking enough of people. And if you ask a lot of people, you will get a response. If you don't even bother asking, then, well, you're not going to get anything. Some people need to be pushed into being hardworking and dedicated. And that's what this book is about, dedication. You need a dedicated following. You can't have people who are just there passively, not fully engaged, not willing to go wholeheartedly into your movement. And he has another quote. He says, "Indeed, the more materialistic our society becomes, the more the dedicated man stands out by way of contrast. The dedicated man makes his own appeal simply by virtue of the fact that he is dedicated." Now, just this word is pretty interesting, dedicated. I mean, when was the last time you met anybody dedicated to anything? I mean, like, truly dedicated. Like, this is what their life is committed to, and they're not going to stray from this path. I would say very few Christians fall under that moniker, right, of dedicated. And you can even see it with things like just the way the general conservative populace acts. Who do you think is more dedicated, conservatives or liberals? Well, liberals are the ones that are willing to cancel people, willing to boycott, willing to fight tooth and nail to create even the tiniest shred of change that brings something closer to their utopian world vision, however stupid it may be. Right? It's these Antifa types, it's these BLM types. They are stopping at nothing, and they really live everything that they believe. They are vehemently militant about no compromise. They live every single moment according to their beliefs, whereas conservative people make tons of compromises and are always willing to put any kind of amount of convenience over whatever they believe in. They really. When was the last time you saw a successful conservative boycott? It hardly ever happens, because it's even just small things like, don't go to businesses that require a vax mandates, right? Has any company felt pressure because of boycotts like that? Absolutely not, because conservative people aren't dedicated enough to their beliefs to actually do these small things that can lead to change. But then also just this personality of the dedicated man, like he says. Too many people, he talks of materialism, right? And dedication to something is sort of antithetical to materialism. If you have something that you truly believe in, something, an idea, a principle, that gives you a lot of strength. There's strength in that beyond the bug man who only is concerned about his Funko Pops, right? And there's an appeal to this. I mean, even if you come across to some people as crazy, just the fact that you're dedicated to something often earns people's respect. And I think it's important to keep this in mind if you're ever worried about appearing extreme or not having friends, not being sociable or personable. Oftentimes, the most dedicated person people are drawn to, and that's how cult of personality works. That's how you draw people into your movement. It's by having this single-minded dedication that is an attractive feature. And so this was a sort of a few good quotes from this first chapter that sort of outlines this difference between Catholicism and Christianity. And then he moves on to what it means to when you finally commit to being a Christian, what does that entail, versus when you finally commit to being a communist, what does that entail? So he talks about the way that the communist mentality is. They're very positive, but also they ask a lot, right? So he quotes the Communist Manifesto. He says he finishes finishes the Communist Manifesto with the words, "You have a world to win." So this is like a very positive statement, but it's also a command. It's saying this on you to create this revolution, create this change in the world. And then he compares this to Christians. When you first become a Christian, what are you asked? So he says, to the Christian, there's an element of sheer tragedy in this. The people with such potentialities should give so much energy, zeal, and dedication to such a cause, whilst those who believe that they have the best cause on earth often give so little to it, and their leaders are so often afraid to ask for more than the merest minimum. So if you want to think about what is true and like what is right and just, we would say that the Christian faith is, or to the Christian, it is, this is the truth. This is the most right and just cause on earth, right? Because it is truth, right? Yet, if you truly believe that, why are you so unafraid to live it? Why are you so unafraid to take every single inch in making the world closer to a Christian society? Why is it these communists that are inspiring people? Why is it them who have this broken and spiritually void worldview? Why are they the ones attracting young people? Why are they the ones inspiring these working class men in all these other countries to fight a revolution? Why is it not the people who actually have the right and just cause? It's because one has to do with the leadership, right? The leaders are so often afraid to ask more than the merest minimum. And it goes back to the first point, that if you ask more of people, you are going to get more. So that was another quote from the second chapter. So yeah, when you finally decide to become a Christian, your life doesn't really change that much. Maybe you start going to church. Maybe I don't know. You become more modest. But when he talks about becoming a communist, this is a strong and drastic change in your life. He says that you're going to be going to communist party meetings weekly, and doing classes and these work projects, selling communist pamphlets and things like that. And they ask you this immediately right out the bat. And it creates buy-in, right? And it makes you more likely to do more in the future. And the church needs to be more like this. It needs to ask its people to do something. And you could almost say shame them if they don't, right? I mean, you need to have some sort of repercussion. But yeah, there's a lot that the Christians could learn from this. And so then he talks about what exactly do they do at these meetings, and they have these study groups. And he says, to the Christian, it may seem extraordinary that an atheist tutor can convince a group of others whom he is instructing in an atheist creed that they are part of a great crusade fighting on the side of good. In fact, this would appear simply to prove man's deep need for a cause, for a faith. It is evidence of modern man's spiritual hunger. So at these classes, these communist classes that that Douglas Hyde was a part of, they were almost preaching in a way, about this great struggle and this great just cause for equality, right? And giving the poor people a future and creating this better society. And this is the ultimate good in the world. Yet it is a totally atheist mindset, right? If you know anything about communism, it is inherently materialistic. Now, despite it being totally materialistic, you're getting this sort of this preachy, crusading type language in these classes, which shows that there is a desire in people to have this great and just cause to fight for. And it is the communists that are absorbing that. They are the ones that are noticing that and cultivating it, while the church is not. The church is not being the ones to recruit these people, to bring them to a actually just cause and convince them to fight for that cause. So they're grossly failing on this front, where the communists are very much succeeding. So these meetings, he talks about them, and they create so much buy-in. You come and you kind of have this, in some Christian groups, you go through Christian apologetics. It's like, well, what if somebody asks you about this? How do you respond as a Christian? Well, they do the same thing for all of their members in the Communist Party. They say, well, if somebody asks me this question about, the Hegelian dialectic, how do I respond? And essentially makes their arguments, very much bolstered in the face of the people that they're trying to convert. Whereas ask an average Christian, any kind of these finer points of theology, ask a Catholic to defend, a Catholic versus a Protestant, to even list some of the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism, let alone defend them, right? When a Protestant asks, why do you pray to Mary? Like something like that. Most Catholics really don't have an answer. They'll just say, because they told me to, right? So there is no education going on. There is no strong apologetics here. And once again, this is a definite thing that they can learn from the communists. So he goes into talks about these groups, and he brings up an anecdote of this man who he just calls Jim. So Jim, he said, was this sort of fat loser kind of guy who had a stutter. And at his first communist meeting, this was led by Douglas. Douglas made some speech that says, any person in this room, if you want to be a leader, we will turn you into a communist leader. And he said after the meeting, this fat, stuttering man came up and asked, he said, well, can you turn me into a leader? And he says, if you stay dedicated and commit yourself to the cause, of course I can. And it basically talks about how over the course of several years, he actually turned this guy into one of their best recruiters. They turned him even into this man with a stutter. They turned him into one of the best public speakers. He just got up on his soapbox and would recruit people on the streets. And it's a very inspiring story that shows, what can we do with people who want to be dedicated and want to be part of a movement. And it all comes back to, if you ask a lot of people, they often will deliver, right? So this Jim, this person who is, a loser and not very good at anything, just by asking him to fully commit himself and saying, if you want to do this, you can do it, he was able to achieve what he wanted. Now, I mean, imagine going to your local church group and saying something similar and how they would respond. I mean, if you say, I want to be a leader in this community and help out as much as I can, and you're just kind of a loser, I think you'd probably get, sort of pushed to the side, because there is no leadership training. There is no pathway to this. There is no activity that you can actually do. There is no Christian preaching anymore, right? You don't go out and give your Catholic pamphlet and try to convince people to join your church. I mean, it just doesn't have that in the same way that the Communist Party does. And it's all of these instances where you need to have some kind of organization of your people. You need to funnel this energy into something useful, because there is a lot of energy. And I think there are a lot of young people who are getting increasingly frustrated with the world that are turning to the church. And as long as the church is not harnessing this, they're going to totally fail. And it has to happen soon. Right? There has to be a very quick turnaround with, finding these young men, finding these people that want to be dedicated and want to be radical, and finding an outlet for them, something that they can do in a way that they can help out their community, help out the church. And once again, these communists are a perfect example of how this works. And then he has another chapter. It's simply titled, "You Must Be the Best," which is a very good and powerful message. So he talks about one of the anecdotes in this was he talks about one guy who was a very vocal member of the Communist Party, and he moved to a new trade shop, right? So he went from one shop to the other, and the new shop was very much expecting him to be, this vocal communist, always preaching every single day, and he wasn't. What he did was, for the first year or so, he did his job and didn't say a word, and he did his job better than anybody else in the room. He just went at it and committed himself to his job and was a master in his craft. Then, once he had earned everyone's respect as a worker and got them to, understand that he, is very skilled and knows what he's doing, then he started preaching his communism, which is very, this is the way it works. You don't just start a new job and then just start, telling people about your radical right-wing beliefs. You need to be an example, right? And it doesn't just have to be in your work, just in your life. When somebody sees a happy and successful person, maybe they have a few kids and they have their life together and they're not depressed and they're very healthy, physically. They look at that person, they say, "Wow, what can I do to be more like you?" Well, then you start talking about your beliefs, your religion, your conservatism, all these things. And that is how you're going to convert people, right? Not just by, jumping down their throats right out the gate. Once you establish yourself in your community, in your workplace, any of these things, this is the first step towards preaching and gaining converts. So whatever you do, make sure you're doing it well, right? If you choose to do something, put your heart and soul into it. So Funky says that's what optics is all about. It doesn't mean watering down your beliefs. Right, exactly. You can be optical without having to compromise on your beliefs. It's just you don't have to put your beliefs above basic human things. You still go to work and do your job very well, and don't let your radicalism interfere with your work, right? That will make people lose respect for you. You do your work, and then once they have your respect, then you can you can start to bring them around to your side, right? So then he talks about their different campaigns and how successful they were, and the case study here was he talked about it was during the war, and they were diverting coal to the troops, and there was a town that had no coal in the middle of the winter, and all of the children were freezing. They were too cold, and basically everybody was just huddled in a corner of the house and shivering together to get through the nights. It was very unpleasant. So what the Communist Party did was they, essentially reached out to these housewives and said, you kind of have this sympathy factor to you. If all of the housewives go and march on City Hall and say, we demand you divert some coal to our town to help our freezing children, they're going to listen to you. So they did that. and it worked, and it was a massive success. And it was a good win for the Communist Party, right? Sort of a strike, because one, the Communist Party was anti-war at the time, so it sort of diverted away from the war effort and brought them into better standing with the town itself, right? So you see somebody pull off a big victory for you, obviously you're going to be somewhat ingratiated towards them. But the angle here was, he talks about when they were in their post-meeting reflection for the campaign, all of the members of the party deemed it a massive failure. And they deemed it a massive failure because most people only saw these housewives taking charge of a situation and did not see the communist aspect. So they did not push hard enough on this communist angle, push this as a class struggle between this bourgeois military and the people who are suffering and shivering. Instead, they sort of turned it into this domestic, housewife-driven campaign. So they're very harsh on themselves, but this allows them to sort of evaluate all these different ways and these different angles that they can take to drive home their point and better spread their beliefs. And once again, this is something that Christians can obviously get behind, because there's no shortage of times when Christian groups have stepped in for some sort of cause, but there's often this sort of Christian humble aspect. You do good things without the recognition, which can be good on a personal level, but on a group level, your group very much needs to take responsibility for the good that you do. You need to make yourself a very public pillar in your community, so that people see the good that you are doing and understand, this is a good movement, something that you want to be a part of. And how do you expect the church to grow if the church is doing good in silence? The church needs to participate in more of these campaigns, and be very vocal in these campaigns. And just something like, when was the last time your local church, organized its own pro-life demonstration outside City Hall, right? It doesn't even matter if that does anything, if it has any, even an attempt to do anything. What it does, it says these people are dedicated, these people want to go out and do something, and they're trying to create change, and and people are going to come talk to you, right? You might get a whole bunch of people coming to swear at you and call you a fascist. Well, if you have well-trained people who can respond to all these points and are intelligent and articulate, that can actually create more converts, right? And these are the things that the church is not doing. A lot of times you're sending out these, Westboro Baptist types, and God bless them for what they do, but they're very stupid, right? They just come out as being hateful and can't really articulate any of these intricacies of their theology, and they just come out. It's very easy to paint them as bad, right? Whereas if you have well-trained optical people who understand how to talk to press and talk to media and do things the right way, that can come out and be a very large net positive in the end. So there's plenty of things that the church can improve on as far as designing their campaigns and then improving upon the campaigns that they already do. All right. So getting towards the end here, then there was there was one on the different ways that communists create propaganda, and one of the things that they do is they're creating a lot of these pamphlets, daily journals and things like that. But the one thing that he says is that they're very easy to read, and this goes a long way, because if you are trying to get the gist of your beliefs out to the common person, you need to use very plain language. You can't use this lofty academic type of writing. You need to write for the common man. And too often, movements are trying to sound, too smart and elitist and all of these things. You need to dumb down your language. You need to make it very easy to understand, and you need to give points in the most quick and efficient way possible so you can grab people. And he said that's what the communists got very good at with their written propaganda. and that doesn't mean that their message was watered down, because once you went to the meetings, you could get, a much more detailed view, much more detailed readings of real communist material and all these things. It would be the equivalent of, the church. You shouldn't be handing people a copy of Summa Theologica and expecting that to be what's going to convert them to Catholicism. No, you need something very easily digestible. And then once they start coming to, Christian classes or discussions or Bible study, then maybe you can bring out the Summa Theologica and start talking about St. Augustine's works and things like that. But it has to be this evolution, right? You need something to grab them, and then something to continue to keep them coming back. So you start with the easy stuff, and then move on to the more complex. And that's how propaganda should work. Then he talks about movies, like in films and things like that, and this is very interesting. He talked about the best communist propaganda film he ever saw was just a nature documentary. It didn't have anything to do with communism. It was just a bunch of shots of, animals in the wild hunting each other and things like that. But one of the things, it was so well made that in this small town, right, the people who saw it, they would always ask, "Oh wow, who made that?" All this, and it would be this member of the Communist Party. So it was sort of back to one of the previous chapters, where he says you have to be the best, right? So because it was so well made, he earned these people's respect, and then could start a conversation about communism. That doesn't mean that the movie itself was inherently communistic, because it wasn't. It was just how good it was that allowed that conversation to be had. And so once again, the things that you do don't have to be inherently Christian, right? It's about it's just about being good, right? And then people are going to search you out, and then you can give them the Christian spiel. Like, I think a good example of this actually is like Clint Eastwood, right? None of his movies are like explicitly right-wing or anything like that. I mean, there's definitely some undertones in all of his movies, but he just makes good movies, right, that get people to watch them, whether they agree or disagree with Clint Eastwood's beliefs. But it might get them to look into Clint Eastwood and his beliefs, and see, well, if this guy is really such a genius, what does this symbology mean? Oh, this was a reference to Christ. Oh, that's really interesting. Maybe I'll start reading the Bible. I mean, I don't know if that's actually the exact thought process, right? But it's just there's something to that, right? And when you have those Christian undertones that aren't explicit, you don't feel like you're being preached at, but you can appreciate the art in it. And so once again, that's something that the communists are doing much better. And this book was written in I believe the 60s or 70s, but you can see how well the communist propaganda, or the liberal transsexual propaganda, is everywhere, right? Is it explicit? No, we're not literally watching militant gay communist propaganda films on Netflix. It's just all of the films or all of the shows have this militant gay communism undertones, right? And that itself creates it starts a conversation, right? And it gets it into people's heads. If we could start doing the same thing on our side, it would go a long way. And I know there's obviously a strong restriction with, how much control can Christians possibly have in Hollywood. But, as alternative media and things like, Odysee and these, places where you can have a more diverse breadth of content, we can actually start getting to the point where maybe it is possible to do some of these things and create our own kind of, our own propaganda, right? And obviously, memes. Obviously, this book was much before memes, but, I think memes go a long way towards getting certain conversations started. So yeah, I think that was most of the material of the book, and then he had a final chapter. So the chapter was called "Leaders for What?" So it was essentially how they're training communist leaders, but they're not just going to be leaders within the party. They need to be leaders in their lives. They need to set an example for everyone. And then, once again, the communism follows from there. So there was a few interesting quotes here. So first he talks about, you have this whole East versus West dynamic, right? You have the East and its, atheist communism versus the Christian West. And this was one of the, angles during the Cold War, right? One is atheist and one is Christian. But he talks about how in the East, right, with Russia and communist Russia, they were militantly atheist to the point where they were trying to create this atheist society, a society without God, and take that to its, fullest form. They were committed to that idea and were not shying away from it. And they were, working tirelessly day and night to turn that image into a reality. Now, if you compare that to the Christian aspect of the so-called Christian West, they're not doing that, right? They are not doing everything in their power to create a Christian society. They are not trying to create a society that has God intertwined. And this is one of the reasons why, right, we can see, Christianity is failing in the face of, liberalism and neoliberalism, because it's we don't have our priorities straight, right? We're setting, now we've become a liberal country with some Christian undertones than a Christian country with some liberal undertones. And so he has this very long paragraph. He says, but there never was anything more than wishful thinking to justify the label of the Christian West. The cause of religion is not served by using free enterprise society and Christianity as though they were interchangeable and synonymous terms. The free enterprise society may be affluent for some, and it has certainly achieved higher material standards than men have ever before known. This does not make it more Christian. Indeed, the evidence suggests that it is more likely to have the reverse effect. There is nothing in Christian social teaching to support the widely held view that men have an inalienable human right to an ever-rising standard of life, regardless of what is happening to other men in the neighboring borough, on the other side of the tracks, or on the other side of the world. So, what this nation that used to be a Christian nation sort of entirely gave that up in the face of, so we could have, free enterprise, liberal capitalism. And these things are not really compatible, right? You either commit to being a Christian society or you commit to being a liberal society. So this is just it's a farce, right? It's a farce to say that, the Christian West is truly Christian, whereas the atheist East is very much atheist, and they do everything in their power to create an atheist society, stomp out religion, and all of these things. Then next, he says, well, the main thing here, right, is sort of like the final punch, right, of the book is, doing works, right? So the final quote of the book, he says, "To the Christian there is something peculiarly poignant about atheist communists saying, as so many so often do, from the very depths of their hearts, there is nothing too good for the party. and then going out and making their actions match their words. There is no need to underline what the Christian's positive response to that should be. So what he's saying is the communists have an idea. They are dedicated to this idea, and then they do everything in their power to bring that idea into fruition and create the society that they want. Christians do not, and they need to. You need to have this idea of a Christian society, of a society with value. You need to commit to doing works to bring that society about, and essentially live your faith. The communists live their faith, right? You don't call it a faith, but they are living it. Christians are not, and that's why they are losing to the communists, obviously. So really what it comes down to is lack of dedication and lack of leadership. So the two things that we need, in our right-wing movements is these two things. And I think this is sort of topical. You can bring into things like this big topic of debate right now is sort of America First versus Patriot Front. Now, America First has a very easy selling point, right? It says if you want to support America First, just follow all of our accounts on Twitter, and just be terminally online, and don't, we'll host rallies every so often, but don't you go out and do any kind of action unaffiliated with us. Don't do any kind of events. It's very, saying, don't go to all these different things. Whereas then you take Patriot Front, which I don't have any affiliation with them, but what it seems like is they ask a lot of their members, right? Once you sign up, you're already doing campaigns, you're doing marches, you're doing these sticker things, which might seem like bullshit, right? Like, oh wow, they put up a few White Lives Matter stickers. Well, this stuff kind of goes, it's just a little thing, but just the act of making somebody do that, it breeds, one, it takes dedication, and two, once you've done it, you're sort of committed, right? It is deepening your dedication once you have, even done a small task like that for your group, right? And so, America First can sort of, develop this a bit more, right? They could, ask more of their members, require more of them, and they're going to get more in return. Because right now it seems like, Patriot Front is asking a lot, and they're getting a lot, and America First is not asking for very much, and they're not getting very much. So I think as soon as, these right-wing movements start adapting the same sort of tactics that, the communists have, we're going to start seeing more success. And what is that going to come down to is actually committing ourselves to some sort of action. And I mean that like, even these small campaigns, pretty much anything, right? So, yeah, I really like this book, and I think it is something that, us young people that are, looking for ways to, help the movement, help the cause, we need to start, thinking in these terms, right? How are we going to organize? How are we going to educate? And how are we going to, spread our message, live our message, propaganda, and all of these things? Yeah, I think that's all I have. So if anybody else has any final comments, I'll read them out. I can start if you guys want, I can start a Telegram voice chat if anybody wants to call in. But I don't know if either of you two are interested. So then Funky says, based on anecdotal experiences with my parish, I can't help but wonder if the Catholic focus on forming large families holds us back in our activism. Raising kids is obviously very time-consuming. I think that's an all-right point, but it gets to a certain age. Maybe if you have very young kids, but at a certain age, there's no reason the whole family can't be church activists. It could even be more beneficial to be a church activist, right? And it doesn't have to be, massive things, but even something like, hosting more, church events or doing service projects or things like that. And I know some churches are good about this, but, these are all things that that could be done. Like, yeah, I have experience. I was a Boy Scout. I'm actually an Eagle Scout. But this is something, the Boy Scouts do. They go out and they'll do service projects. They'll build things. They'll fix things. They'll do car washes to raise money, right? They're always out there, or at least we were always out there doing something to try and help the community. And this made us, it makes us look good, right? And the fact that we're affiliated with the church as well, and therefore it makes the church look good. It's things like this, right? If the church has an affiliated Boy Scout group, and then you send the Boy Scouts, these young, dedicated men, and send them out to do service for the community in the name of the church, that you're going to create a positive image and, get more people interested in your message. And I bring this, Boy Scouts thing up because, you're getting basically free labor from boys who are, 10 to 18 years old, right? So if you have a large family, that should not be a super bad hindrance to doing more activism. If anything, it just means more activists, right? Or at least it should. But, to a certain degree, you are correct, right? It does take a lot of effort to raise kids, but that's also why maybe you need more of a community. Some of the elderly members, offer free babysitting to people in your church, so that more people can do church activism, right? It's things like this. And what it takes is leadership, right? It takes a certain amount of organization from the top down to get these things going. And it also starts with asking more of people, right? Ask somebody to do something. They say, oh, I can't. I have to take care of my 5 kids. Oh, well, we can have, Gertrude from the church, or, 70-year-old woman, she'll take care of your kids for the day. Now you have no excuse. You have to go do this, right? Things like that. And that just, it takes dedication and it takes leadership. There you go. So I guess that's a good way of ending this discussion. So yeah, check out the book. I thought it was pretty good. And if you are following in the Telegram, I'm going to put out a poll to decide what the next book we're going to read is, and we'll have an announcement on that soon. So thanks for checking in, thanks for watching, and have a good night.